Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. All right, guys. Preemptive like, useful charts, great channel. So NATO, a bit more in the news lately for obvious reasons. Um, this is going to go through the command structure. So NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. If I'm right, right? And so the top of this would decide whether NATO countries go to war or not. I'm assuming it's more complicated than that. It has to be. So let's learn. My name's Connor. Hello. It is 110, March 3rd, a Monday. And I'm ready to learn. Let's go. If you are not ready to learn, there's the door. Home X down the hall. Let's go.
Hi, this is Matt Baker,
Hey.
and today I'm going to show you how NATO is currently structured. NATO is one of those things that most people, myself included, hadn't really thought about much during the post-Cold War period. However, due to recent events, it's suddenly in the news a lot. Because of this, I realized that I didn't actually know much about NATO or how it worked. So I started looking for some charts explaining how it is structured. But I discovered that most of them are out of date because in recent years, NATO has undergone a major reorganization. I therefore ended up making my own chart based on the NATO command structure in 2022. Let me show you what I learned.
Phenomenal channel. Ooh, I always forget he does like Animal Kingdom charts. I want to check that out.
At the top of the NATO command structure is the North Atlantic Council, which is the main political decision-making body for NATO. You've probably seen this man, Jens Stoltenberg, in the news lately. He's the chair or secretary general of the council, and therefore the main public face of NATO. However, the actual decision-making power of NATO lies in the hands of the 30 permanent political representatives that make up the North Atlantic Council.
Okay, I'm an idiot at the beginning. Of course, the head of NATO is not going to decide whether all nations in NATO go to war. It's okay, understood.
Political representatives that make up the North Atlantic Council. Basically, there is one person for each country that is a member of NATO.
Who's ours?
And since there are currently 30 NATO members, there are 30 people on the council. Serving on the council is a permanent full-time job and is roughly the equivalent of being an ambassador. So, for example, the United States is represented on the council by Julianne Smith and the UK by Sarah McIntosh. The Secretary General of NATO is often someone who has previously served as a prime minister or other high-ranking minister in their home country. The current Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, is a good example. He is a former prime minister of Norway. His current term as Secretary General of NATO ends on September the 30th of this year. But there are no term limits, so it's currently up in the air as to whether his term will be extended or whether someone new will be appointed. Okay, so directly under the North Atlantic Council is the NATO Military Committee. And it is here that we move from civilian leadership to military leadership.
Lieutenant.
Like the North Atlantic Council, the Military Committee is also comprised of 30 people. One person from each of the 30 NATO countries. But instead of politicians, we get active military personnel. Technically, whoever is the current chief of defense for each country is the person who sits on this council. So, for example, although the United States doesn't actually have a chief of defense, it does have an equivalent position, which it calls the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That person is currently General Mark Milley, the highest ranking military officer in the United States Armed Forces. So in addition to his job as Joint Chiefs of Staff, he also represents the United States on the NATO Military Committee. However, since most chiefs of defense are pretty busy with their day job...
I always got confused. I'm like, is Turkey in the EU? but it's NATO. So Turkey is not in the EU. It is in NATO. Okay.
However, since most chiefs of defense are pretty busy with their day jobs, NATO countries also all have a permanent military representative who stands in for their chief of defense most of the time. In the case of the United States, that person is Lieutenant General John Diedrich. The NATO Military Committee is always chaired by a person who previously served as their country's chief of defense. Currently, that person is Rob Bauer from the Netherlands. As chair of the Military Committee, Rob Bauer is the senior military advisor to Jens Stoltenberg and the rest of the North Atlantic Council. Note that both the North Atlantic...
I thought J is pronounced like an H. So wouldn't it be like Jens Stoltenberg or Jens Stoltenberg? No, doesn't matter.
And the rest of the North Atlantic Council. Note that both the North Atlantic Council and the NATO Military Committee are based in Brussels, the capital city of Belgium. Okay, moving down. Directly under the Military Committee are two strategic commands known as Allied Command Operations and Allied Command Transformation. Although these two units are equally ranked, the Allied Command Operations is arguably the more important of the two. Its headquarters in Mons, Belgium, is known as SHAPE, which stands for Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe.
A lot of Americans. Daniel Dwyer, Burke.
The person in charge of SHAPE is called the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, a position first held by Dwight Eisenhower in the years following World War II. Ever since then, the position has always been held by an American, the current holder being General Todd Walters. In addition to their role within NATO, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe also always retains their role within the U.S. Armed Forces, where they serve concurrently as the head of U.S. European Command, one of the 6 geographical commands that the U.S. military divides.
This is cool. So the U.S. has a different... Okay. Central Command. Central Command is pretty small, but that makes sense because there's a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East. Okay.
Divides the world into. So yeah, it's a pretty important position. Underneath SHAPE are 6 additional commands, 3 tactical and 3 operational. The 3 tactical commands are based on the 3 main branches of the military, so air, sea, and land. The Air Command is based in Germany and is currently led by American General Jeffrey Harrigan. The Maritime Command is based in the UK and is led by British Vice Admiral Keith Blount. Finally, the Land Command is based in Turkey and is led by American Lieutenant General Roger Cloutier. The 3 operational commands are known as Joint Force Commands, and this is because they can combine units from all 3 military branches as needed. In Europe, these commands are based in Brunsum, which is in the Netherlands, and in Naples, Italy. And as of 2021, there is a 3rd JFC, located in the United States, in Norfolk, Virginia. Now, underneath the 2 Joint Force Commands in Europe is the NATO Response Force, which represents the actual forces that can be deployed. This includes the Multinational Corps Northeast in Poland and the Multinational Division Southeast in Romania. Under these 2 headquarters are 8 NATO Force Integration Units, or NFIUs. Basically, there's one in each of the 8 countries along the eastern edge of NATO. It's from these locations that NATO could quickly deploy troops if needed. Now, although 6 of the NFIUs fall under JFC Brunsum and 2 under JFC Naples, The entire NATO response force as a whole is actually controlled by either one of the two JFCs on an annual rotation basis. So for the year 2022, it is Brunsum that is in charge. There is also a segment of the NATO response force known as the Very High Joint Readiness Task Force, or VJTF. As the name suggests, these forces can be deployed even faster than the regular response force. Every year, one country in NATO is assigned to dedicate troops to serve as the VJTF. Currently, that country is France. In contrast, most of the 8 NFIUs consist of multinational forces. For example, the NATO unit in Latvia is actually led by Canada, but also has troops from Albania, the Czech Republic, Italy, Montenegro, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, and of course Latvia itself. Okay, let's now go to the other strategic command, Allied Command Transformation. As I mentioned earlier, this command operates at the same level as SHAPE. The reason for this is that it used to be SHAPE's North American counterpart. You see, originally there was an Allied Command Europe and an Allied Command Atlantic. But in 2003, Allied Command Atlantic ceased to exist and instead was replaced with Allied Command Transformation, whose goal was to transform NATO to meet the needs of the post-Cold War world. Ever since 2009, which is when France rejoined NATO, Allied Command Transformation has always been led by a French.
Why wasn't France in it before? Why did they leave, I wonder?
NATO. Allied Command Transformation has always been led by a French officer. Currently, that person is Aerial General Philippe Levine. Under Levine's command are 3 transformational command units. The Joint Warfare Center in Norway, led by Polish officer Piotr Malinowski. The Joint Analysis and Lessons Learned Center in Portugal, led by Romanian officer Bogdan Cernat. And the Joint Forces Training Center in Poland, led by German officer Norbert Wegner. Basically, all 3 of these commands are focused on training and development rather than on direct operations. Okay, so that was just a very brief overview of NATO's current organizational structure. It
is so much more confusing than I expected. Jesus, okay.
Of NATO's current organizational structure. It's a very large organization, and there are lots of other offices and divisions that I wasn't able to cover. But hopefully I was able to give you a general idea of how the alliance works.
Yes, you did.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for making. Man, okay. Maybe I was being naive, thinking that it would be more simple than that. But even considering that, it still seems like there's so much room for stuff to... I feel like the efficiency of this thing working depends on the solidarity of all of the allies, and I get that's kind of like that, but okay, it was my first go through with this topic. Very interesting, and something I need to learn more about for sure, and especially considering the times we're in now. Hope you're all doing well. Chin up, you'll be okay soon, don't worry. See ya.